You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, we have a major update from the court case that has gripped the nation as far as the Trump administration is concerned, and it is bad news for Trump. Can you explain what just happened in court?
Yeah, Brian, a magistrate judge in federal court down in Tennessee just ruled that Donald Trump and Pam Bondi's Department of Justice failed miserably in its efforts to prove that Abrego Garcia should be detained in that Mickey Mouse criminal case they brought against him down in Tennessee. The judge ruled that they failed to prove that Abrego Garcia was either a flight risk or a danger to the community, and those are the only two grounds on which somebody can be ordered detained pending trial. And the magistrate judge, whose name is Barbara Holmes, ordered his release. Now they're going to be back in court on the 25th of June. Abrego Garcia will appear, and at that time, the judge will decide what sort of conditions she should set in releasing Abrego Garcia. And it's not unusual for judges to set conditions. Sometimes they'll say the defendant has to wear a GPS ankle monitor. Sometimes they'll say he has a curfew. There are things he can and can't do while on release. But the magistrate judge will order his release. Importantly, and this was a stinging rebuke to the Department of Justice, because DOJ and the third-rate lawyers that Pam Bondi keeps sending into court on these suicide missions, figuratively speaking, just failed miserably in carrying their burden at the detention hearing.
Can you give a quick explanation about what this case in particular is? Because, of course, everybody watching knows that Kilmar Abrego Garcia was the victim of an illegal deportation to CCOT. He kind of did the incredible by getting released from CCOT, and this was months after the Supreme Court had ruled that he had to have his release facilitated. But this case is not that one. This is not the illegal deportation and return to and from El Salvador. This is something entirely different because the Trump administration needed some pretext to be able to lock him back up once he got here. So can you explain what this case in particular is about?
Yeah, Brian, the backstory of this case is just as interesting as the story of what will happen moving forward in both this case and in the deportation matter. So this will take a second to unpack. Just as you say, the Trump administration violated Abrego Garcia's constitutional due process rights. That is getting notice of what the government's going to do against you and having an opportunity to be heard in court and make your argument through counsel as to why you shouldn't be deported. The Trump administration violated his rights, shipped him off to a prison in El Salvador, where an immigration judge had previously ordered he may not be deported to El Salvador. The Trump administration didn't care because, the intimidation is the point of what they've been doing. So then, after judges and the Supreme Court ordered that DOJ must facilitate his release and return to the United States, they ginned up, and I use that term advisedly, DOJ ginned up this bullshit federal prosecution in Tennessee, which involved Abrego Garcia being stopped in a traffic stop with a number of undocumented folks in the car, none of whom were apparently committing any crimes. And he didn't get so much as a traffic ticket. He was allowed to leave. And they used that as a basis to return, an alien smuggling indictment against him, which pretty much fell apart, Brian, at the detention hearing that produced this new order that we're discussing. And let me tell you, our viewers may remember when that indictment came out from Tennessee, which is where the traffic stop occurred. That's the only reason the case was brought in Tennessee. I read it, and as a career federal prosecutor, I said, this is garbage. This is, your word, a pretext, a face-saving, endeavor by DOJ, because they were ordered to return him from El Salvador, where he had been unconstitutionally deported. So this is garbage, and I recognized it instantly when I read the indictment. And now, not that the magistrate judge who just ruled said that it's garbage, but you know what she did say? Listen to this, because this shouldn't be the Department of Justice. We should start calling it the Department of Stinging Rebukes, because that's what they're getting every day from federal court judges. The judge basically said during this detention hearing where DOJ tried to lay out its evidence that Abrego Garcia should be detained in the criminal case because he's a flight risk and a danger to the community. The case was built on numerous layers of hearsay from witnesses with extensive criminal histories and promises of benefit from the government, from DOJ. In other words, say stuff that implicates Abrego Garcia and we'll take care of you. Right. But here are the most stinging words from the magistrate judge. The witnesses, that information, that evidence they presented, that testified to things that, quote, defy common sense, close quote. Brian, DOJ lawyers, in my experience, don't go into court and present evidence and information that a federal court judge finds defy common sense. It is something no DOJ lawyer should ever allow themselves to do, and something that no attorney general should ever order them into court to make these bullshit and often unethical arguments. And federal judges are calling these DOJ lawyers out day after day after day. But I need to sort of finish the story now, because here's where we stand, and this was probably going to be your next question. First of all, this is a detention decision. And let me tell you, Brian, I've got the opinion here, a 51-page opinion and order from Magistrate Judge Barbara Holmes in a detention matter, where the only question is, okay, what is the evidence that he committed a crime, and is he a flight risk or a danger to the community such that he should be detained pending trial? I've never seen 51 pages written on that. Usually we get either an oral ruling from the bench or maybe a 3, 4, 5-page written order from the judge in a detention matter. Here's what happens now moving forward. Magistrate judges are not presidentially appointed federal judges, as all other federal court judges are. Magistrates, I don't want to call them judges light because that sounds insulting, but what they do is they handle the minor preliminary matters in criminal cases. So they handle arraignments and detention hearings and preliminary hearings, but then the case goes to a full presidentially appointed judge. So because this detention decision was made by a magistrate judge, DOJ will have to decide if they want to appeal it to a full judge, which they have the right to do. I don't know if they'll do it because this is such a stinging rebuke. They may not want to get the same rebuke from a full presidentially appointed judge, but we'll know that in a couple of days.
Right, and I want to ask a question from there, because now we have a situation where a judge has ruled that let's move into next steps where we can discuss the conditions of Garcia's release, but I don't presume it's that simple, because at the same time, when we were going through this process just a few weeks ago, the DOJ had come forward and said that even if you order him released, we're going to make sure to detain him on the other charges, on the pending charges as it relates to his deportation case. And so what happens here in the event that we do set out the conditions for him to be released? Does he immediately get taken back right into custody again?
Yeah, Brian, great question. Let's drill down on that. And for context, let me give people a sort of everyday example of when somebody is detained in two cases or in two matters. I would prosecute, for example, an alleged murderer in D.C. That person was also charged with murdering somebody in one of our neighboring jurisdictions here, either Maryland or Virginia. So there were actually two prosecutions up and running at the same time. So what would happen is, if I would go in and hold a detention hearing for the defendant in my case, and for whatever reason the judge ordered that I failed to prove danger or flight risk such that the defendant should be released in the D.C. case, there was what's called a detainer lodged against that defendant by the other jurisdictions in which he's being prosecuted. So even if a judge in D.C. orders the release of somebody, that person doesn't actually get released. The custody gets transferred to the other jurisdiction in which that person is being prosecuted. That's similar to what's going on here. The judge is going to order Abrego Garcia's release in the Tennessee criminal federal prosecution. However, DOJ told the judge, hey, judge, this is just an academic exercise because we, the federal government, are also detaining Abrego Garcia in his deportation case. That's an immigration case before an immigration court judge. And guess what? You order him released in the Tennessee federal prosecution, fine. We're going to then transfer his custody into the immigration case, and he will remain in jail one way or the other. And the judge, this is beautiful, Brian, said, the magistrate said, yeah, guess what? That may very well be. but I will be honoring Abrego Garcia's due process rights in this case, and because you failed to prove he's a flight risk or a danger to the community, I will order him released in this case, and the collateral consequences in other cases are of no moment to me. So the judge kind of upbraided DOJ for that. So what will happen is then Abrego Garcia, his custody will be transferred to the immigration case, and then he'll have to appear before the immigration judge. And guess what? There's no guarantee that immigration judge is going to order Abrego Garcia to continue to be detained in the immigration case, because remember, when he was snatched up by Donald Trump's stormtroopers in the first instance and shipped off to El Salvador, he was in the community. He had that deportation matter back then, and he was not being detained. He was working. He was on release. So I think you're going to see a robust argument made by Abrego Garcia's lawyers in the deportation case, which this will now shift over to. That, wait a minute, Judge, make no mistake about it. He should be restored to his very same situation before the Department of Justice snatched him up and treated him unconstitutionally. So we want him released in the deportation case as well. Now, I don't know what the immigration judge might do, but I'll tell you, that argument has some real power behind it.
Right, and I guess the good news here is that these trumped-up charges, no pun intended, as it relates to this Tennessee case, kind of fell under the weight of their own frivolity. So that's some good news here. We will, of course, continue to stay on top of this case as it relates to the deportation matter, but you know, all eyes continue to be on this case in particular because of what it represents more broadly for Donald Trump's broader immigration fight and his effort to prevent folks here in the United States from being able to access their constitutional rights of due process. So for those watching, if you want to stay on top of this story and other breaking news, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on this screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.